Welcome to session called Amalek. I don't even remember what I called it. The Legacy of Amalek. Vikings. I don't remember what I called it. Let me get it's going to take me a moment to orient myself, and then we will be ready to get started. So excuse me for 1 second for taking this time. Just have to get my own sheet so that I can look at it. Okay. Okay. Welcome, everybody. This is Genocide, Vikings, and the Climate. I am Rabbi Haggai Resnikoff, and we are here to talk over a few of the major issues of the 20th and the 21st century, and going back all the way to the time of the Tanakh. Okay. I want to, before we start, just note that I want to just thank YCT for having this amazing Yemei Iyun. Source sheet seems to be locked, says somebody. Eric, are you on that, or should I can make a new, I can get a new I don't
have edit access to it. But if you add me to it, I can change it very quickly.
I will just post a link on the web. This was the link you had was I'll post it on the chat. The link you had was apparently set up by YCT. Here is the link from the horse's mouth. Try that. If you can't get there, then I think that should work though. Everybody should have access to that. Okay. Before we start, by the way, for people who are using the closed caption, I am going to ask people to use the chat a little bit in this session. And what I would like is if you're using the closed caption, what you should do is you should reduce. It says that there's no access. Is anybody else facing the same issue that that Michael is having? Yes, everybody's having the same problem. Hold on a second. We'll try one more time. Here is one more. Okay, try again. At this point, it should be anybody with the link should have access.
We're good to go.
Fantastic. We are ready to go. So if you're using the closed caption, what I'm going to ask you to do is just be sure to open up your chat. You open up your chat on the side of your screen, and that way it won't disturb the closed captioning. I don't actually see any closed captioning, so I don't know what's going on with that. But
if you're looking for closed captioning, you have to click on the CC button where it says closed.
There we go. Okay, terrific. So I don't know if you got that if you're not using closed captioning, but if you need closed captioning, click on the CC button at the bottom of your screen. Okay, before we begin to talk about this, I want to ask the following question. Or I'll start with the following introduction. The mitzvah to absolutely annihilate Amalek is a disturbing mitzvah in the modern age when we've been introduced to the idea of genocide. And not even we've been introduced to the idea of genocide, but the concept of genocide was essentially invented on our bodies, meaning on Jewish bodies in the Holocaust. So it's very disturbing to see that we have a mitzvah in the Torah to destroy an entire tribe of people, call it what you will. How do you understand, you 22 people, 21 people who are out there who are here for this, how do you understand, or why do you understand how do you understand this mitzvah? What is the reason for it? Why is it so important that we absolutely annihilate Amalek, that we shouldn't preserve any of their goods? And what's more, we don't let anyone live. There are no survivors from a war with Amalek. So take 30 seconds to think it over and then write in the chat what you think. And I'm going to read it off and we'll just see where we're standing at the beginning of this shir. So I see that Ellie wrote, there must be some cost-benefit analysis that they fail spectacularly, meaning it's so not worth leaving them alive, and there's such a cost to leaving them alive. They represent the epitome of anti-Semitism. From Michael, very nice. From Lauren, destroy the concept of Amalek, the cruelty of Amalek, not physical destruction, but destruction of a way of life. I'm actually going to go slightly in that direction in this shiur. They were a tribe of marauders for pleasure and symbolic of people who reject the idea of God. That's two different things, right? One is that they were marauders, which is something that I'm actually going to argue for. And the other is that they reject the idea of God, which I think is maybe true. We'll have to think that over. I'll take two more comments, or maybe this is enough. These are extremely interesting and far-reaching comments, so very comprehensive. It looks like we're not going to have two more, and we're not going to have any more comments. So at this point, I'd like to ask you to leave the chat empty unless you're using for technical matters. The people who are using the closed captions are able to use that. And now let's start looking at some of our sources. Okay, the question of Amalek is a question that comes down with us through the ages. Let's just have a look at the actual mitzvahs that appears in Parashat Zachor, which we read about 2 weeks ago, meaning the week before last, so it was a little more than a week ago, when we read Parashat Ki Tetzei. The psukim say as follows. Zachor et asa lecha Amalek bederech betzeitchem mimitzrayim. Remember what Amalek did to you on the way when you left Egypt. Asher korcha bederech, they happened upon you on the way. Vayizanev becha kol hanecheshalim acharecha, and they attacked the tail. They attacked Vayizanev, they took the tail, all the people who were trailing out behind you. Ve'ata ayef v'yagea, and you were exhausted. Ve'lo yirei Elokim, and they did not fear God. Ve'haya behaniach Hashem Elokecha lecha mikol oivecha misaviv ba'aretz asher Hashem Elokecha noten lecha. When God will place you securely in the land that God is going to give to you, timche et zecher Amalek, destroy the memory of Amalek, mitachat hashamayim, from under the sky, lo tishkach, do not forget. So there are a bunch of some very interesting pieces here, some of which we saw in the comments that some of you made, and I'll just point out. There was the comment that Michael said about they denied they were the the epitome. They denied God, right? They did not fear God. So that's one thing that we see here that was in the comments, right? We see something about cruelty, that they attacked the weakest. They attacked the people who were sort of trailing along behind, the people who were at the end of the wagon train. So that's another thing that seems to have been suggested. And the last thing I'll say is what Lauren said, which is right, timche et zecher Amalek. It doesn't actually say timche et Amalek. It says timche et zecher Amalek, the memory of Amalek. And right, the name of this shiur is the legacy of Amalek. What exactly is their legacy? So let's think for a minute about the problem with this. Because the problem really goes in two directions. And Rav Aaron Lichtenstein, in an important essay that he wrote, or it was actually a sicha that he gave, that was called Being Frum and Being Good, he discussed really the problematics of Amalek. And this is what he wrote. He said, I mentioned before that the quest for goodness is an integral component of frumkeit. When we are frum, he says, we have to be searching for goodness. Generally speaking, this is true. But regarding certain particular tzivuyim, surely we write divine commands, surely we find instances in which obedient responses to God's normative demands stands in apparent opposition to what we conceive to be good. If you will, to what we understand that God conceives to be good. Here a problem arises. How do we relate to this? There are times when God, now I'm not reading, I'm paraphrasing. There are times when God says to us, I command you, this is like Avraham at the Akedah or the mitzvah of Amalek, I command you to do something that you would not expect me to command because it doesn't seem like what you're used to me telling you is good and right. What makes this problem more acute is now I'm reading again. What makes this problem more acute is the fact that it arises particularly in individuals who are morally and spiritually sensitive. Those who are relatively coarse are not concerned with these issues, right? People who don't have a sensitivity to trying to do good don't flinch when God tells them to do something that we would normally consider to be cruel or difficult or immoral, right? Those who are, said that already. Who is troubled by the command to wipe out Amalek? Those people have succeeding in developing the kind of moral sensitivity that is important to us. However, so that's the first half of the problem, says Rav Lichtenstein. The first half is that God sometimes commands us to do things that are not what we would not normally consider to be acceptable by normal standards. And that being the case, if we're searching to be good, what is good? Is it what God says or what we're used to being good? And now Rav Lichtenstein says something that I think compounds the problem. He says, but of course, the resolution must be clear and the grappling must all be done within the parameters of the understanding that however much I wrestle, I do not for a moment question the authenticity or the authority of the tzav. I have a mitzvah. It's counter to what I normally think of as moral and good, but I know that it's authoritative because it comes from God. I do not judge God, says Rav Lichtenstein. I assume a priori that his deeds are perfect, for all his ways are just. Hatzur tamim po'alo ki chol derachav mishpat. Kel emunah ve'ein avel, a faithful God without iniquity, righteous and upright is he. So this puts us in a real bind. This suggests, or this tells us, that we can end up in a situation where we struggle with the goodness, with the authenticity or the acceptability of a mitzvah that God tells us, and yet at the end, the winner is always going to be God. In this shiur, what I am going to do is I'm going to try to bring what I would call the two poles, what God wants and what we think is right. And I'm going to try to describe, based on a historical or a literary historical theory, I'm going to try to bring them closer together. I'm going to try to say, maybe there's a reason. Maybe there's a reason that God wants this thing done. And that way I'm going to try to reduce the problem somewhat. And then I'm going to try to make the problem something that we can really identify with and actually get behind. Not the problem. We're going to try to make the mitzvah of destroying the legacy of Amalek something that we can really get behind. Okay, we'll see how well I do. The first question I want to ask, the first interesting question that comes up with regards to Amalek is, who is this nation? Who are they? They show up in the middle of Sefer Shmot, and we've seen them once before. We saw that when we listed all of the tribes that came out of Esau, the brother of Jacob, we saw that there was a discussion of a concubine of I forgot his name, of Esau's eldest son, and her name is Timnah, and from Timnah comes Amalek. That's the story we hear, and we don't hear anything else about that until Amalek appears in the middle of Sefer Shmot, and they fight with Am Yisrael. Okay? What we seem to know about Amalek comes from the psukim that we read in that parasha, in that discussion, and from the mitzvah. They seem to have attacked the end of the group. They seem to not want to attack the main body, right? They're not somehow opposing the progress, right? Think about like Sichon and Og, right? The kings of the Emori, who came out with Am Yisrael when the nation of Israel was coming to Eretz Yisrael, to the land, right? These two kings came out and they faced off, right, against the Israelites. That doesn't seem to be what Amalek is about. Marauders, said Michael, right? They seem to be attacking the weak end of the long line of the march of Am Yisrael. That seems to be who they attack. What's more, there's this miracle that when Moses raises up his hands, then Israel is successful. When Moses puts down his hands, Israel fails. I'm not sure that tells us much about Amalek. What's interesting about Amalek is that they appear several more times in the Tanakh. This is not a universal discussion of Amalek. We're not going to see every single time that they're mentioned. I will mention a few times also where they appear, where it's a little surprising that they appear. So first of all, in the blessings of Bilaam, in the portion Parashat Balak, when Bilaam is up there and he's blessing the Jews and he's telling what is going to happen to Moab in the continuation of history, we hear he looks around and Vayar Amalek. He sees Amalek and he gives Amalek a prophecy as well. Amalek are like way back there before Mount Sinai. They're on the Egypt side of Mount Sinai. How is it that Amalek are suddenly here with the nation approaching the land? And it turns out that Amalek seems to be everywhere. They crop up in all sorts of places. Let's look at the book of Judges, source number 3. Vayosifu, this is the 3rd chapter of Judges. Vayosifu b'nei Yisrael asot hara b'nei Hashem. The children of Israel continued to do evil in the eyes of God. Vayechazek Hashem et Eglon melech Moab al Yisrael. So God raised up Eglon, the king of Moab, against the Jews. Al ki asu et hara b'nei Hashem, because they had done evil in the eyes of God. Okay, Eglon, Moab. We're familiar with Moab. We remember that the Moab is approximately across the Jordan from Am Yisrael. And now let's just see who comes to actually do this conquering. Vaye'esof elav et bnei Ammon. He gathers the Ammonites, who we also know, the Ammon and Moab, right, belong to are sort of they're a pair. They belong together in this region. Ve'amalek vayelech vayachet Yisrael. He collects Ammon and Amalek, and they go and they attack Israel. One more time. This is still, again, in the book of Judges. Vayasu b'nei Yisrael hara b'nei Hashem. They again do evil in the eyes of God. Vayitnem Hashem biyad Midian sheva shanim. So God gave them over this time not to Moab, but to Midian. V'hayayim zara Yisrael. If the Jews would plant crops, ve'ala Midian va'amalek uvnei kedem ve'alu alav. So we hear that Amalek is still there, still circling, still hovering around the outskirts. This time, not with Moab. Moab was conquered by Ehud, and now it's Midian, right? They're going to get conquered by Gidon, but Amalek is still there, nibbling at the outsides. In the book of Samuel, Saul is instructed to destroy Amalek, and he goes and he attacks Amalek and he destroys their city. He does leave the king Agag alive. Agag seems to be the continuation. Agag's children seem to then become the ancestors of Haman, but there's a whole city of Amalek sitting just on the borders of Eretz Israel. We had no idea, but it just sort of pops up. The key explanation to who Amalek are is in the next group of psukim, source number 5. This is in Shmuel Perek Lamed, and it's when David is kind of this Robin Hood character. He's running from Shaul, and he's trying to help the good and defeat the evil. Okay, and he's coming back from a battle that he had. Vayihi bevo David ve'anashav Tziklag, bayom hashlishi, va'amaleki pashtu el Negev ve'el Tziklag, vayaku et Tziklag, vayisrafu ota be'esh. David has taken his troops outwards to help defend the Jews. And in that time, Amalek arrives, and attacks and burns David's camp in Ziklag, to ash. Vayavo David v'anashav, so David and his soldiers return to the town. V'hinei srufa ba'esh, and it's been burned. Uneshehem uvnehem uvnotehem nishbu, and their children and their wives have been taken captives. Now David takes up his army and they go out after Amalek on a rescue mission to rescue their wives and children. And I want you to note specifically here, they're going to find Amalek and pay attention to what the Amalekim have been doing. What has been their activity? Vayoridehu vehine netushim al pnei kol haaretz. Right? So they found Amalek and they find that all the Amalekites are lying around on the ground. They're exhausted. Ochlim v'shotim v'chogegim. They're eating and drinking and celebrating. Bechol hashalal hagadol asher lakhu me'eretz plishtim u'me'eretz Yehuda. They're celebrating all of the booty, the spoils that they have taken from the land of the Philistines and the land of Yehuda. So somebody, I'll look back at my chat, somebody told us that Amalek is the epitome of anti-Semitism, right? They didn't make that up, right? The rabbis say that, right? It was Michael Chernick, right? They represented the epitome of anti-Semitism. But the truth is, according to this, that Amalek were not just attacking the Jews. They were a thorn in our side. They kept on showing up all over the place, but we weren't their only victims. They were also attacking the Philistines. Now that's interesting. Usually we don't get the sense that there's like a lot of internecine warfare going on. People sort of defend their territory, right? But otherwise, I don't know, the Torah doesn't seem to suggest. There are a few places, especially when you start getting Ashur, where people start sort of moving out of their normal territories to go attack other nations. Paro Necho, the Pharaoh of Egypt, who attacks the Assyrians in the time of Yoshiyahu comes to mind for me. But it's not that common an event. But these Amalekim seem to be going around attacking not just the Jews, but also the Plishtim. And this brings us back to what, I have to look at my chat again, to what Michael Schatz said to us, which is they were marauders. Now, whether they were marauders for pleasure or for spoil is a good question. I tend in the direction that they were marauders for spoil. They needed, or they wanted and perhaps needed to raid other communities. They were what certain historians have called raiding civilizations. Now, this is interesting. When I was at UC Berkeley in the history department at UC Berkeley, not meaning when I was studying there, the professors once or twice did talk about raiding civilizations, whose economies were essentially based on raiding other civilizations. Essentially, they didn't make enough in trade or in farming to actually support themselves, and so they had to actually go and steal from other groups these resources in order to keep themselves alive. When I went looking for this idea in sort of various historians, I found it extremely rarely. It doesn't seem to be the idea of a raiding civilization who economically is dependent on raiding doesn't seem to be a frequent thing. I found one citation, and that was years ago. When I went to look it up recently, I found that it was taken out of the new edition of the book that I found. It was about certain Native American tribes after they had been beaten down by westward expansion of Europeans. They found the need to essentially attack various other Native American tribes in order to maintain their economies. But even that was taken out. I'm not sure if it was taken out because it was seen as sort of an unsavory thing to say about a group of people who had faced a fairly difficult history, or because they the author no longer thought it was true. In any case, it's very rare to say that. On the other hand, it seems clear that the ancient world believed that this was a possibility. Let's look at the next source, which is Thucydides, the history of the Peloponnesian War. Thucydides is like in the second page of Thucydides. This is like the part that you're skipping through when you're trying to get to like the great speeches and the powerful the powerful words of Pericles. But this is in the very beginning where Thucydides is talking about the history of Greece. And this is what he says. He's actually talking about the history of navies in Greece. And he writes as follows. I'm not sure who the translator is of this particular version of Thucydides, but I've looked in various translations. So if you're not happy with this translation, you can find this anywhere. It's like in the first 2 pages of Thucydides. For in early times, the Hellenes and the barbarians of the coasts and islands, as communication by sea became more common, were tempted to turn pirate under the conduct of their most powerful men. The motives being to serve their own cupidity, which I think means greed, and to support the needy, meaning people who needed the resources. They would fall upon a town unprotected by walls and consisting of a mere collection of villages and would plunder it. And now here is the key line in Thucydides. Indeed, this came to be the main source of their livelihood, no disgrace being yet attached to such an achievement, but even some glory. An illustration of this is furnished by the honor with which some of the inhabitants of the continent still regard a successful marauder, and by the question we find the old poets everywhere representing the people asking of voyages. Are they pirates? The people want to know, are they pirates? As if those who are asked the question would have no idea of disclaiming the imputation. Are you pirates? Nobody says like, you offend me by calling me a pirate. Being a pirate is an honorable profession. Now, not only so Thucydides seems to believe in the idea of raider civilizations, that is to say, groups whose economy is based on whose economy is based on stealing from other civilizations. What's more, Thucydides introduces us to an idea that, which I think is more true, which is the idea that even if it wasn't necessary economically, culturally, the way to cultural status, the way to cultural capital was by way of raiding. And this is certainly true of the Vikings. And we find this in Icelandic sagas over and over. I bring you Egil saga. I don't know how to pronounce it. Egil, probably it's Egil. Egil saga. Egil is a Viking, and he and his crew go off a Viking, right, to go and raid people. And there's all kinds of descriptions of their war. But to give you an idea of what the essential culture of a raider civilization is, I've brought you one particular episode. Now, Egil and his 12 had gone through a wood and then saw wide plains and village. This is source number 7, and tillage, sorry. Hard by them stood a house. For this they made, and when they came there, they ran into the house, but could see no one there. They took all the loose chattels that they came upon. There were many rooms, so they took them a long time. But when they came out and away from the house, an armed force was there between them and the wood, and this attacked them. Egil's party was wounded, and after that, taken and all bound, and so brought to the farmhouse. The owner of that farm was a powerful and wealthy man. He had a son grown up. Now they debated what should be done with the prisoners. The good man said he thought this were the best counsel, to kill them one on the heels of the other. Destroy them utterly. Does that sound familiar? Just kill them. Don't talk to them. Don't mess with them. Kill them one at a time. His son said, if you wondered what the origin of the joke of people who make killing the enemy, like, in movies, you have to no, we're not going to kill him. We're going to put him in an unnecessarily complicated situation and kill him that way, and then not pay attention so he can escape, right? It begins in Icelandic sagas. Here it is. His son said that the darkness of night was now closing in, and no sport was to be gotten them their torture. He bade them let them bide till morning. He somehow convinced them to let them live until morning. So they were thrust into a room and strongly bound. Egil was bound hand and foot to a post. Egil strained and worked at the post till he loosed it from the floor. And then he freed his comrades. But when they were all loosed, they searched round for the likeliest way to get out. And they escaped. I'll just tell you that. But when they came to the wood, then Egil stopped, and he said, and this is the key piece of this episode, "This our going is all wrong and not warlike. We have stolen the goodman's property without his knowing thereof. Never ought that shame be ours. Go we back to the house and let him know what hath befallen." All spoke against this, saying they would make for the ship. Egil set down the mead cask that he had been carrying. That was like his booty. He got this huge keg of booze, and then ran off and sped him to the house. Now, what is he going to do? Is he going to call out and challenge them to single combat? No such luck. Egil seized a beam, carried it to the dining hall. This is a burning beam, apparently, and thrust the burning end under the eaves, and so into the birch bark of the roof, which soon caught fire. But those who sat drinking within did not find it out till the flames burst in round the roof. Then they rushed to the door, but there was no easy way out, both by reason of the faggot wood and because Egil kept the door, and slew most who strove to pass out either in the doorway or outside. He lit the house on fire and then stood by the door and killed everyone who came out. That was the glory for him. That's what we're talking about when we're talking about raider civilizations. Raiders are people who they go, and the glory is both in the collection of the wealth, but also in doing violence on the people who they have stolen from. And that is not the only way to conquer that, I argue, is to utterly annihilate the entire civilization. Does this hold true for does it make us, shudder anymore at the idea of killing innocent children, innocent men, innocent women, anybody who hasn't done these kinds of things? Not so much. It's still a difficult idea. I haven't solved the problem entirely, but at least I've given some context. And by the way, I totally believe this is the pshat of the Torah. I have very, very few chidushim where I've said the right thing, but I think that this is definitely the pshat of Amalek. Amalek are this raider culture, and what they do is they attack the weak with the purpose of stealing booty, but also with the purpose of glory and grandeur in their attack. And therefore, you can never leave Amalek alone. You can never stop the war until they are all gone, every single one of them. That is the key. By the way, and now this brings us to the legacy of Amalek, right? What does that tell us about Shaul, King Saul's attack on Amalek? For those of you who remember the story, King Saul attacked Amalek with the purpose of destroying Amalek. He was told to destroy Amalek completely and take no spoils. Why take no spoils? Why couldn't Shaul take spoils? The answer is that the legacy of Amalek, what Amalek does, what their Zecher Amalek is to do violence and for the purpose of taking spoils. Lahashmid, laharog, ulabed, right? To destroy everyone, ushlalam lavos. And the booty will be spoiled. That's what Amalek is all about. So Shaul, when he goes to destroy Amalek, is instructed not to become Amalek. Do not take spoils. This is not just my read of Tanakh, although I have to say this is a bit of a long shot and we're really running out of time. I will say briefly that Rashi says something similar to this in explaining a Mishnah. A Mishnah in Masechet Kiddushin says, I'll just get to the punchline, Hakasher shetabachim, the kosherest butcher of kosher butchers, shutfo shel Amalek, is the partner of Amalek. Why is a kosher butcher the partner of Amalek? So the Tosfos Yom Tov brings us Rashi, and he says, Sveikei trefot baot liado. They get animals that might not be kosher. V'chas al mamono u'ma'achilam, and they want the money, so they let other people eat the non-kosher meat. They're simply not trustworthy. That's the argument of Rashi and the Mishnah. Now, the Tosfos Yom Tov has a different approach. We'll talk about it another time. He gets into cruelty, which I think Lauren mentioned. But the idea that Rashi says, right, they are exploitive. Right? Exploitive people are shutfo shel Amalek. Now, this goes so far in so many different situations, right? But let's just see one more example of how we know that the legacy of Amalek is not just destroying them, but destroying their legacy is destroying the legacy of what did we say? The legacy of exploitation. And this we get to Esther, and this will be our last sources. The legacy of Amalek is Haman, and Haman says to the king, Imal hamelech tov, if the king agrees, yikatev leobdam, let's destroy the Jews. Va'aseret alafim kikar kesef eshkol al yedei osei hamlachal havil ginzei hamelech. And I will take from the spoils. It doesn't say take from the spoils, but I think that's the pshat here. There are other pshatim, and Chazal actually read this a little differently, that Haman is trying to bribe the king to do this. But I think the simple read of this is that he says, I will take 6,000 or 10,000 pieces of silver as part of this action against the Jews, and I will bring it. The king will benefit by 10,000 pieces of silver. And again, when the word goes out that you're allowed to destroy the Jews, what do they say? Lehashmid, laharog, labed et kol hayudim minar ve'ad zaken taf v'nashim. Right, that's our mitzvah on Amalek. Biyom echad, bishlosha asar l'chodesh shneim asar chodesh adar, and the key phrase, ushlalam lavos. Now we get to Esther, the 9th chapter of Esther, which some people struggle with. I do not. And the reason is the following. Vayaku hayudim, this is source number 11. Vayaku hayudim b'chol oivehem makat cherev vehereg ve'avdon vayasu b'tzonehem b'rtzonam. The Jews destroyed their enemies. Anybody who came against them, they destroyed them. It's not clear to me. I think that the Jews attacked anybody who attacked them, but it is possible that the Jews attacked people who were known to be anti-Semites, known to be Jew haters. But here's the key. ובשישון הבירה, הרגו יהודים ועבד 500 איש, 10 בני המן בן המדתה, צורר היהודים הרגו, ובביזה לא שלחו את ידם. They killed, but they did not spoil. Their war was a war of self-defense. It was not a war for the purpose of taking spoils. And again, in the continuation, right, look at the very end of the passage, right? Uvabizalo shalchu et yadam. They killed thousands and thousands, but they did not put their hands to the spoils. I argue, and I think it comes out of the Tanakh. I think arguably you could claim that it comes out of Chazal. I argue that Amalek are the embodiment not of anti-Semitism as was suggested, but of exploitation, of people who take and do not give, of people who do violence and in their do violence for the purpose of personal gain. And therefore, what is the legacy of Amalek that we are instructed to destroy and utterly annihilate? The legacy of exploitation. So the legacy of a Canadian student of mine said that there's recently been legislation against predatory loans in Canada, right? Predatory loans, predatory lending, predatory business practices of various sorts. And now I'm going to get to what I always get to these days, because it is my obsession, right? The way we treat the earth. The climate crisis that we are experiencing today. And I'm not going to argue, like, if you don't believe in the climate crisis, like, okay, you came to like a shiur where somebody does believe in it. I'm not going to argue. It is obvious to me that we are in the middle of a serious crisis. The crisis is caused by exploitation of resources without consideration of, and doing violence in many cases, both to people and to the earth itself, without, and for the purpose of personal gain, without actually, without any kind of rebuilding, without any kind of action that is intended to reduce the exploitive aspect of our behavior. That is my claim, and therefore, to destroy the legacy of Amalek, the best thing I think we can do is turn to the climate, the environmental projects in general, but the climate in particular as a serious violence that is being done against people now, right? And as a way to try to reduce the violence that has been done. We try to eliminate the legacy of exploitation by trying to repair the climate. That's my spiel. I've gone through from the Tanakh, right, through Thucydides and the Vikings, right, to try to come up with a historical theory of why we have this mitzvah to destroy the entire tribe of Amalek. And in the end, I argue that the modern translation of the modern translation of this mitzvah is actually to consider our effect on the environment, to consider the exploitation that has happened over the past really 200 years, and try to solve that problem. Okay, it is 8:55. We have it's not a long time, but we have 5 minutes if people want to make comments or ask questions in the chat. The chat is now open. If you're using the CC, just remember to open your chat so it'll appear as a window at the side of your screen, and that will prevent it from interrupting your closed captioning. Let me know what you think. Tell me. Don't argue with me about the climate. I'll just ignore you. But if you want to talk about Amalek, if you want to talk about exploitation, if you think that what I'm saying is far-fetched, feel free to bring that up. I'd be happy to answer any questions. I am not seeing lots of questions. So with that, I will stay on for another 4 minutes. But the shiur is that's the shiur. I'll try to think if I have anything else to say, any other sources. I cut out a lot of sources in the course of this, but I pretty much said what I have to say about Amalek. I'm right on. Oh, so here we go. I'm right on with the comments on the environment, says Lauren. Thank you, Lauren. It's good to hear people agree. Ellie, I hear that you've raised your hand. I don't know if I don't think we're taking, I don't know if we're taking specific. I don't know if you can unmute. Can you just type what you want to say into the chat, Ellie?
All right, I've been granted the rare power.
There you go. Look at that.
Thank you, Eric. Yeah, just thinking about how this fits perfectly with the real final sin of was it Shaul, right? That he let the sheep.
Yes, he took spoils. He
it was perpetrating that, like, or continuing that sin, which actually allowed that sin to continue, right? Because the king of Amalek was one of those sheep or something like that. Or I don't know if I'm like weaving too many midrashim into the shot, but
I don't know. The interesting question about the king of Amalek is a different question that Rav Lichtenstein, I think, has said correctly, which is, as long as you do everyone, then we know that you're doing what God told you to do. As soon as you start picking and choosing, then we know that you've got something going on. Your purity of purpose is gone. So anyway, that's how I normally understand the Agag situation.
I like, to me, it seems like any, like, even one action of marauding, one action of exploitation creates a what's that game called? What's the not Tragedy of the Commons, but the that game situation, right? And if as soon as you have one free rider, it creates incentives for other free riders.
Yes.
The number one way, and this is extremely important in climate policy, the number one way for to fight climate change is to create situations where there are no free riders, incentivizing other people to be free riders, where everyone feels, the obligation. And even one free rider can be disastrous for climate policy. One person who gets off free destroying parts of the world just means no one else feels compelled.
Michael Chernick made a comment, and I'm going to read it again. He says, as Haman is clearly an anti-Semite and a descendant of Amalek, is there still an element of anti-Semitism in Amalek's history? My impression is that Haman is undoubtedly an anti-Semite, and that the attempted genocide in story of Purim is about a clash between Haman and Mordechai, where Haman sees a Jew countering him and decides to lay hands on Mordechai. It doesn't see, look, in my theory, the Torah follows the Jews, and so you do find Amalek constantly attacking the Jews. My impression is that that is not so different than like the fact that the Ammonites constantly attack the Jews, or in the Book of Kings, various peoples become, right? First the Philistines become important, then Bnei Ammon become important, various groups become important, they attack because they're anxious to expand their borders and so on. I think of it, it's funny, it's not really appropriate to call it nationalistic, right? But I think of it more in terms of defending territory and taking territory, as opposed to having something specific against the Jews. Haman really did. He was, to my impression, he was the first. Until then, it looks to me like Amalek are opportunists. That's what it looks to me like they're doing. All right, it is 9. Thank you for staying to the bitter end, those of you who stayed. And once again, I want to thank YCT and Eric Garfinkel, our host. And everybody have a wonderful night, and Shana Tova, right? Rosh Hashanah is coming up. Kol Tov.